Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's live chat and Sabbatical Summit Live. We're bringing you a series of live candid interviews with accomplished cruisers and industry experts to plan for the adventures ahead. Today, we've got a really special guest. I'm very excited about this one, Craig Margetts, who are going to talk to us about his epic adventure sailing around Australia with his family on board a Seawind 1160 sailing catamaran. They took a year off with wife Kerry and two boys after a stint of the boat operating in a charter fleet. And this one's of particular interest to me because it's something I love to do, and in fact inspired the book that I wrote, Sabbaticals, and a bunch of other case studies we put in it. So Craig, welcome, mate. Thank you for joining us this morning from sunny Brisbane. How are you?
Good morning, Brent, and thank you for having me.
No worries. And what's your situation at the moment? Locked up in Queensland in paradise. Must be a real struggle up there.
Yes, it's terrible here because we've got it was cold the other day. We got down to it was almost 20. Yeah, it was terrible.
Yeah, rub it in. All right. Well, we're very envious down here in the south. Hopefully, we'll be storming your borders soon, at least on the waterfront. So, so before we get into the topic, I always like to understand, I guess, the background of people and where they've come from and experience levels and so on. So, what was your first boat? Where did the interest in sailing come from?
My first boat was my next door neighbour's. I was crewing for my next door neighbour on his on his mirror. I had a sabot and then a mirror, and at university I had windsurfers. Then I had a bit of a gap, and I sailed a brand of boat called OPBs, the other people's boats. They're wonderful boats because they're very cheap to maintain. And then when I got to Queensland, we were living up in Mackay near the Whitsundays, and having chartered a boat myself in my university days, I thought, I'll go and look at actually putting a boat in the fleet to help pay for some of the costs. So we got a second-hand 1000, and then we got Scarlet, the 1160 following up.
Right, so you had two boats in succession in the Whitsundays.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. And why did you do that, and how was that experience?
Look, it was great because we were living nearby, particularly, and we were with Cumberland Yacht Charters, and I think they're all, pretty good. The charter companies up there, they'll look after your boats surprisingly well. In fact, they looked after my boat, I think, better than I look after my boat. So anybody who's worried about buying an ex-charter boat, they're probably in better nick than most other boats. But we were living nearby, so we could take it out on weekends when it wasn't being hired out. So that was very convenient. But it's a beautiful cruising ground, obviously the Whitsundays.
Yeah, and did you find that a good, practice area to build some experience up with the family?
Yeah, it was, and we brought that, and also the delivery voyages. I think people underestimate how valuable their own deliveries are when you buy a boat and you bring it from somewhere else. We bought one of our boats from Lake Macquarie and the other one up from Sydney, and so those delivery trips were wonderful learning experience there. We had some other knowledgeable crew with us, certainly on the first one, but then sailing around the Whitsundays really got us into the cruising and snorkeling and enjoying the experience.
And did you always have in mind a circumnavigation of Australia? Like, did that lead you to getting that particular boat? I've got an image here of Scarlet. This is your 1160.
Yeah, we didn't initially. We always wanted to go cruising, but the idea of going around Australia was because there was actually a rally proposed. It got cancelled because of some politics around Western Australia, that somebody who was trying to get a large marina objected to the government, saying it would be unsafe to have a large number of boats. But we took leverage of the fact that they'd actually done the passage planning in a very broad sense, and we thought, well, you pardon the French, we just said, stuff it, we'll go anyway.
Right. So you did the circumnavigation they planned to do.
I don't give a damn, yes.
Yeah, sure. So I think we've got a rough outline that I put together, which is actually on our website if anyone's interested, if you dig into some of our sabbatical plans on the website. But we've got a rough outline here of all the stops that you took. And
there's a slight addition to that, in that when we got to Melbourne, if there's anybody internationally, that's the one at the bottom in Victoria. We were ahead of schedule, so we then crossed Bass Strait and scooted across the top of Tasmania. So we've done one of the three sides of Tasmania, and we're pretty keen to go back and do the other two.
Yeah, right. Excellent. So plans to go to Tassie at some point in the future?
Yeah, Tassie. We want to go to New Zealand. We want to go to the out in the Coral Sea to the islands, New Zealand, all around that area, and then who knows what after that.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, well, we'll be planning.
Getting in the way, but I'm trying to fix that.
All right, I think we'll be planning some talks about Tassie and New Zealand soon, so we'll see if we can cover that for you. So I've got a more detailed outline here of everywhere you went. Now, your total time on the water or in the journey, is that right? 328 days, so it's just under a year it took.
That's right. And the total miles, the miles that you've got there, the 7,556 is the straight line. We did just over 9,000 boat miles. So, you know, there's a bit of tacking and backwards and forwards as well.
Right. Okay. So I want to get into, before we get too much in around the places you went and saw, a little bit around planning, I guess, and preparation of the boat. Now, obviously, this is a really interesting snapshot of what reality looked like. But did you do some planning around, you know, where you'd expect to be on certain, you know, weeks or months or days in advance?
Yeah, so the general rule of thumb, which we followed, it was the plan underlying the rally plan, which is where we got some of this data from. Is you want to be up in the north in the winter and the south in the summer. Sorry, other way around. North in the dry season in the summer, and the south. What am I doing? South in December, north in our winter. Yeah. Because you don't want to be up in the cyclone season up north, and you don't want to be in the Southern Ocean in midwinter.
Sure.
Pretty much going anti-clockwise is the general rule. You have the wind with you more than not, but there is no way to get around Australia with the wind behind you the whole time. About a quarter of the time you're going into the wind, which is pretty good. That means 3/4 you're not. I'm
just going to bring up here while we're talking about that a little snapshot of what the weather looks like at the moment on windy.com. If anyone wants to get a great, you know, weather tool, this is a nice one just to have a look at visually. But so what you're talking about here, so you started in Brizzy, right?
We did, yes.
Craig, yeah. So you've got essentially southeasterlies blowing you right up all the way, and then you favourable winds pretty much to, well, where did you start? You would have had to punch into it, land on the west coast somewhere.
So in the Kimberleys, you often get very light winds, which is wonderful for cruising and seeing things. And it's good because it really doesn't matter if the wind's going in the wrong direction. They're quite light. Good enough to sail though on pretty much every day there. But really when you turn the corner over in Western Australia out around Carnarvon, go down you want to point over to the Western Australia, the vertical bit down towards Carnarvon, down Geraldton, down to Perth. That bit we were pushing into the wind, that part. So really, that was the only part that we were really going into the wind.
Right. And that would have been what time of the year was that? We got it here somewhere.
That would have been trying to think. That was
October.
Yeah, October. So they say you should leave a little bit earlier. Perhaps if we were doing it again, we'd push those dates there back up a month, leave a month earlier for all of them. So we probably, because the winds are lighter coming down the Western Australian coast a little bit earlier, and we left it just a smidgen low. It wasn't too bad, but it was perhaps that part of Western Australia was the least pleasant part of the journey.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've got yourself leaving there in Brisbane the 2nd of May. So if you left, say, the 2nd of April,
Yeah.
I guess you've got a chance of a cyclone you got to be aware of going up to Townsville there. But
Look, the good thing with cyclones is they don't spring up on you. You get a good week's warning.
Mm.
And you know, with the cyclone season or not, it's pretty unusual to get something that late in the day.
Yeah, yeah. So we'll encourage people to ask questions. We've got some questions that have been submitted in advance here. So apart from the timing, best times in different places, the weather around, I guess, this schedule that you followed, I mean, apart from going a month earlier, is there anything different you do to avoid weather patterns, or was it generally
No, the weather was
favourable?
pretty good. The other thing we looked at for weather is for planning purposes. On the bomb, there's a bunch of weather roses. It's a very good site on the Bureau of Meteorology for prevailing winds at any particular time, morning and afternoon. And we found them both useful and you know, pretty accurate from a planning point of view. So I'd recommend that. I haven't got the exact website with me, but if you look up the Bureau of Meteorology and look up wind rose, it'll come up. But otherwise, the weather and the other thing about advice, of course, is wherever you go, there's plenty of people who want to give you advice.
That's true. You ask 5 people, you get 5 different answers. Yeah. In terms of the boat, what sort of preparation, we'll just flick back here, a tile, were you, I guess, making on the boat in terms of equipment, safety gear, sail choice?
So we...
And also, Craig, I mean, it's really interesting because this was obviously a boat that operated in charter commercially for how many years? Like, was it 5 years?
We had it in for 3 years.
3 years.
One of the there's a couple of motivating factors for going around. One is that my wife developed breast cancer and is a breast cancer survivor now, 10 years, so it was good. But at the time we thought, well, there's no point in waiting till we're older, we may as well do it now. And somewhat conveniently for us, it was right about the time of the GFC, so the boat market up there was getting a little bit less profitable, so we pulled the boat out early. But otherwise, it had pretty much the standard equipment we had for charter. We had bought, towards the end of the charter fleet, we'd bought some new sails, and that was handy. We had a spinnaker and a screecher at the time, and that was our, and a storm sail, which we had donated by Barracuda, I might say. So thank you very much to Barracuda for donating a storm sail, which that storm sail, by the way, has been around Australia 3 times now because we've loaned it to other people to go around. So it's only been used once and not in anger.
I was going to say, did you ever use it?
I did. We dropped a batten out of the jib and it was fluttering badly coming down WA. And I didn't have a spare batten on board, which was a bit daft, but never mind. And so I put up the storm sail for a day or two, and I was absolutely gobsmacked how much a tiny little sail like that altered the sailing performance. So it was, it was. So we used it, but it wasn't really in anger in the sense it wasn't a storm.
Yeah. Okay. So you had a storm sail, you had a spinnaker, so asymmetrical kite,
self-tacking jib,
a screecher, and obviously your main. So the sails would have been what, Dacron or a cruise laminate?
Cruising laminate.
Cruising laminate. All right. So the next one up from the Dacrons.
Which,
so,
by the way, we were expecting to last a year. We're hoping to last the year with the cruising laminates, and 8 years later, we were still sailing and winning races with them.
There you go. Excellent. So given that sail choice, I mean, is there anything you'd change? What were the sails you're using most, considering you had the weather behind you a good chunk of the time?
Yeah, these days I've got a Genoa, which is my sail of choice, but going easy cruising, the jib was very handy. You know, you can put it up and it's a set and forget exercise to a large degree. That was nice having that. So I would certainly take it with me if we were going. Again, yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
And if the weather gets it all heavy, it's pretty bulletproof.
Excellent. And in terms of what else did you put on the boat? So you ended up putting a generator and air conditioning on the boat.
Yeah, so we had genset and air conditioning we put in largely for the charter fleet benefits, but that was handy. In fact, we actually had the air conditioner on reverse cycle in the Southern Ocean, heating it up one night. That was nice. But in terms of safety equipment, obviously we put lifelines down the side, just going from the forklift that you can see there to its equivalent at the back. Across the front, you could see the big sturdy cable for the Seagull striker, and so that was that we could get the whole way around the boat on that with harnesses. We had a man overboard system we installed. We had obviously the usual EPIRBs and things. We had a life raft that we borrowed. That's another story.
A life raft?
Yes, that's another story, but I won't go into that one now. That's you have to buy me a beer to hear that story. We had a life raft on the back, and we what else did we have for safety equipment? Obviously, we got jackets made by Stormy, which are both wet weather jackets with built-in harnesses and are also Category 1 life jackets at the same time. So we rather like them because I will remember to put my jacket on. I don't always remember to put my harness and my life jacket on, but by having the Stormy, when I put the first one on, I've got the other two on already. So that was a good safety feature for my laziness.
I think we've got an image here of that I'll bring up. There we go. So that's your Stormy jacket.
Yeah. So if you rip the big tag on the breast pocket there on the left hand, my left, if you rip that down, the thing inflates.
Right. Well, that's pretty cool for down south, particularly, right?
Yeah. Well, it's just my standard wet weather gear, and so when I've got that on, I've got a life jacket, and you can see the harness buckle sticking out. So they're handy, and obviously the usual EPIRBs and things like that. But we also have a man overboard system for the helmsman wears at night time, or when we have a reef in. Has an AIS system as well. Right.
So it picks you up on the chart plotter, and you can come back and pinpoint where you are in the water, obviously. That's right. So, yeah. Okay, and what about preparation for, yourself, Kerry, your wife, the kids? Was there anything you did in terms of, I don't know, training or and also provisioning too? Hey?
Do I look like somebody who's done a lot of training? But in terms of sailing, sorry, that's what you mean, obviously. Look, the best training that we had was just hopping up and down the coast. To be honest, sailing around Australia is about going out and doing a one-day trip and forgetting to turn around. And do another one, and eventually you're the whole way around. So it's not until you come to the Gulf of Carpentaria, there's about 3 or 4 places where you end up having to do multi-day sails. The Gulf of Carpentaria, the Great Australian Bight. Maybe if you go across around some of the corners, like either the southeast or southwest corners of Australia, you end up doing an overnighter there occasionally. But just doing day sailing, if you're in Sydney, going to up to Port Stephens or something like that. It's a couple of days up there. They're just day hops. And that's what we just did. We just did lots of those all the way around. And by the time we got to the Gulf of Carpentaria, we'd done a couple of overnight sails. We'd done a few things like that. So it's a really great way to ease yourself into long distance cruising. I would be quite happy now, although I haven't on my boat, I'd be very happy to go and take the family to New Zealand tomorrow. It's great. That experience is fantastic.
Yeah. So as the saying goes, eating the elephant one bite at a time.
Exactly, absolutely. It's a lot easier than people think. If you can do a day sail for 5 or 6 hours, you can go around Australia. Oh, there's the dog.
Did the dog go with you?
The dog did go with us. Our dog had his own life jacket and had his own dog overboard system. We asked Ray Marine if they'd change the MOB to a DOB, but they said they wouldn't.
Fantastic. I think I don't have a photo of the dog, but there you go. All right. So, okay. So preparation and just quickly provisioning. I mean, I guess when you're going along the coast, you've got a fair bit of flexibility up the East Coast, but some of those remote locations, you've got long periods of time, particularly up around the Kimberleys and so on, between
So the
ports.
Kimberleys, we left Darwin with enough food for 45 days.
Wow.
So the kind of emergency. Hang on a sec. Here, hello, everyone.
Right, there's the sailor dog.
There you go.
Made it.
Hello, everybody. Hello. There you go. That serves him right for barking earlier. So going down the Kimberleys, it was 40 days. So in Darwin, there's some really great places you can get your food. You meet cryovac, and we have an 1160 Classic. So at the back, we've got a big fridge, outdoor fridge, 130 litre indoor fridge, and 2 freezers, which are, you can probably remember, I can't remember how big the freezers are. Anyway, 2 decent sized freezers. There was an amount of canned food and stuff under the bilge. We cooked our own bread every day.
Right.
We actually took a bread maker with us, and at those days I bought a very simple square wave not sine wave inverter, and that fried the bread maker on day one. We carried the thing entire way around Australia. I don't know why we didn't get rid of it. But what we did find was that the bread maker mix made fantastic bread in the oven on the boat. So we continued with the bread maker there. The fruit and vegetables we kept in an esky at the back. So we froze milk and we froze water, and then as we were using, we'd take it out of the freezer, put it into the esky, and that was the ice block for the fruit and veg to keep it cool, not cold. So it wasn't a powered esky, and quite a bit of dry and canned food as well on the way around. We did have to get the water line raised a bit.
I bet. Well, that's a common issue there, I must say, but fair enough. So why don't we move on to, I guess, some of the places that you ended up going, and maybe you want to highlight, I guess, what were some of the biggest highlights and the biggest challenges along the way? I mean, obviously the Kimberley is a pretty spectacular and highly sought after destination, I think, for Australians. What was your take on it? Was it?
Yeah, the Kimberley is fantastic. I think you've got a couple of photographs there of that, don't you? The Kimberleys are fantastic. They're everything they're said to be. It's the land of the big red rocks. You can see a photograph of the Kimberleys like that, and you can tell immediately where you are. It's obviously there are issues with crocodiles, but apart from that, it's terribly, terribly safe. That's us as a family sitting up. The boys are now 19 and 20. So,
and what age were they there, Craig?
It was 8 years ago, so they were like 10 and 11 then. Right. So we had just the most amazing time in the Kimberley. As so often, quite light winds, beautiful days, very little rain. By the way, a water maker is pretty much a must-have. You can get water at a large number of places there, but it's much less work if you can make your own water and you can just enjoy the swimming rather than having to be carting water. But you can do it without a water maker. There's an example. That's at what's it called?
Crocodile Creek.
Crocodile Creek, thank you. Yes, indeed. Crocodile Creek, you can just see on the picture there, there's 2 lines going off on starboard side. So there's rings in the rocks, and you just anchor your boat in the middle of that. And we set up a little ferry system with the dinghy. I think that's Lockie in the dinghy freeing himself up, and the water that in the foreground is all fresh water. So it's just beautiful up around there. So the Kimberley is the picturesque, picture postcard. Every day is another treasure. You could spend double the amount of time we spent there quite easily. The other area that we really enjoyed, obviously the Whitsundays and the coral up the coast, but we take that a little bit for granted living up here, and we've been up and down that a few times. But if that's new, obviously the Great Barrier Reef is fantastic as well. The third area that we found really, really good, which was a surprise to us, was the Southern Ocean. We really absolutely enjoyed all around the archipelago of the research down in the Southern Ocean. There's over 100 islands down there, and I had no idea they were there. A lot of people that I've spoken to have no idea either. The anchorages are fantastic. The beaches are wonderful. The scenery is a little bit more windblown than, say, the tropics, but it's just stunning scenery down there as well. So we were really surprised, because we've heard a lot of people give the horror stories of going deep down south and getting blown to pieces. And we took, I think it was about 10 or 15 days or so to go across that, including the Great Australian Bight, and it was just fantastic sailing and just beautiful scenery.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting, because I think a lot of people are, naturally a bit concerned about going through the Southern Ocean. And you were down there, where are we? Like Port Lincoln, you were there around Christmas time.
Yeah, we got to Adelaide, to South Australia for Christmas. Yeah.
Right.
So it was about the month before, so November, October, November. It was just great. And the weather systems down there are fantastically predictable. You get a big high, then a little high, and a big high, and a little high. And they come across with great regularity. The middles of the highs are just sunny weather. In fact, we were in the middle of the Great Australian Bight. We had to put the motors on because there was no wind. So you just climb it at the beginning of as the high comes across at the beginning of the high, going anti-clockwise. It's a southerly and a gentle one at that. Well, when I say gentle, you could get up to 20 knots, but it wasn't like a howling storm. And then it goes to calm, and then it swings around. You get gentle northerlies. So going across the Great Australian Bight took us 3 days and 3 hours. The actual bight itself.
Wow.
As I said, we had gentle southerlies followed by a day of pretty much calm, and then in the third day was gentle northerlies. So it's really pretty amazing there. There's an island called Eastern Island, which is on the easternmost edge of the archipelago, and that sticks out. If you can put your pointer on that screen, just in the Great Australian Bight, just towards the left. You got a pointer there?
Yep.
Go to the right of that. Keep going to the right. Keep going to the right. Stop to back. Just up where the little knob comes off of Western Australia. Go back another centimetre. That's it. And about a centimetre to the right of there. Yeah, right about there is an island right there.
All right.
Called Eastern Island. So that makes that little jump across the Bight really quite small. And it's an absolute bullet hole island with a U-shaped harbour in it.
Wow. And so was that from that there across to
Laguna?
The next up, Laguna, right? So that was a 3-day.
Yep.
Trip across there, right?
Yeah, in 3 days is really, that's all it is across the Gulf of Carpentaria is 3 days or 2.5. So, so that was the biggest single trip we did in the entire circumnavigation.
This passage, yeah. So I want to come back. I'm going to come back a little bit into the Kimberley region and up north in a second, but just a couple of questions on this part of the world. And Doug, welcome, Doug. Thanks for joining us, mate. Question: weather conditions in the south coast and did you have to wait out many storms? So it sounds like not necessarily at that time of the year if you're watching the high pressure systems.
Yeah, so it's not so much waiting out a storm. It's just, it's. I think I've explained it to people like when I was at school, all the girls used to play skipping. So it's just like waiting for the turn of the skipping rope before you jump in.
Right, and jumping on the right
So
way.
we might have waited a couple of days in a couple of places.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so just going back, I guess up north here, and actually before we go down into the Kimberley there, because we've got a few questions I just want to touch on. But what about right up north? So Cape York, across to Darwin and those places. What was that? Because obviously a bit of passage across the top there. What were those conditions like?
So the beauty of as you go north on the Queensland coast, you're getting more and more remote in a very, very gradual way. So it's fantastic. It really eases you into that being a little bit more by yourself. There's still lots of really good anchorages. Going across the top from east to west is pretty much a downwind journey. So coming down if you see those two orange dots at the top, coming down the inside coast of Queensland, the Gulf side of Queensland, it's basically an offshore breeze there. So we were sailing down in dead flat water until we got to the latitude we wanted to get to marry up with Gove, and then we just headed due west across there. That was 2.5 days from memory across there. Right. So that was our first experience of kind of being in the middle of nowhere. Although you're not in the middle of nowhere because the Coast Watch keeps coming past and saying g'day and how are you. So it's...
And I think this photo of the boys is up north somewhere too, isn't it?
Yes, that's pointing towards the hole in the wall, I think, as I recall.
Okay.
So off the top of Gove, there's a big Long Island there whose name escapes me right at the moment. And there's a gap in the middle of it, and you whiz through there with the tide with you, obviously is helpful, or at reasonably slack tide. At anything up to 6 knots of current, it's best not to do it at the peak of the current. But that's a bit of fun going through there.
Now, a question that Bruce has asked here, which I think is a highly valid one: do crocodiles in the far north really try and climb up the back of your boat?
We didn't have any crocs climbing up the back of the boat, but we chose never to leave the dinghy in the water, so we always put it up on the davits. I've heard people saying things like that. Crocs are pretty lazy creatures unless they think they're getting food. So it's a lot of work to climb up the back. We had wires across the back, which probably wouldn't have stopped a croc if they really wanted to get in, but on land, they're quite ungainly creatures. So it's really about not being in the water with them.
So no swimming.
Yeah, I don't know anybody who's actually had that problem. Everybody's heard the stories, and I'm sure it does happen. But we had no problem. There were a lot of crocodiles. We would go during the day, and we would be excited because we'd see 3 crocodiles, and then you get your torch out at night, and you go, "Oh my God, there's the other 200." When the eyes are looking back at you. So,
and what about in places like Crocodile Creek? I mean, you're getting around the dinghy.
In the freshwater, it's fine. I wouldn't go swimming in the salt.
So you can find some freshwater holes.
Oh, it's freshwater absolutely everywhere.
Right.
The most beautiful swimming holes on the planet. It's just fantastic. And it's funny because when you look at it, it looks so dry and barren. You think, oh, there's going to be no water here. And there's everywhere you go, there's great swimming places.
Now, got a question here from Pat Callanan. Welcome, Pat. Well, another adventure from the land variety. What about anchoring in some of these areas in the Kimberley? The tides are notorious. So 8-meter tides in some of these places up north, right? How did you manage your anchoring?
They are. Well, we had, I'm just looking over here just to see if I can, I've got a particular photograph of that actually. Mightn't have it easily. No, never mind. The anchorages have big tides, so it's about making sure you've got enough scope out. But most of the area is beautiful sandy bottom, so the anchoring is quite easy anchoring. But looking at the tides, you become an expert at tides in the Kimberleys, because not only do they go up and down, but they go sideways a lot, in the sense that there's a lot of currents associated with the tide. So you're timing a lot of your travel to be with the tide travel, because that can be up to 2 or 3 or 4 knots. So travelling in the tide with 3 knots is a lot different to travelling into 3 knots. It's a 6-knot difference. But anchoring was very easy. We actually put the boat up on the beach to just to change the, what do we have to do? Oh, I changed it to some anodes once on a beach, and just to have a look at the bottom. I was looking at the photograph of that the other day and noticed the bottom wasn't particularly clean. And then, of course, it occurred to me, of course, being in the Kimberleys, the last thing I was going to do was swim under the boat and scrub the bum.
Right. And actually, that's a really important point, in the fact that you could beach the boat. And a question here from Stephen, whether anchorages are only accessible by cat. And I guess, did you find a catamaran had advantages in any of these locations?
Look, it's great being able to shove it up on the beach, absolutely. That's a little bit more tricky with the monohull. But in terms of the anchorages, look, when you've got 8 metres, the extra 1 or 2 is not going to make much difference.
You're either high and dry or you're not.
Yeah. We, at one point, that was in the Southern Ocean though, somebody else, and I won't name my wife's name, did manage to ground the boat when we were coming into an anchorage, so we had to kedge off from that. But otherwise, being able to put it up on a beach when we wanted to was an advantage. So that was very handy.
Yeah, right. So I guess you had 2 young boys on the boat, the family. How did the kids go, and how did you handle, I guess, family life on board? And what was that experience like?
So it was interesting for us with education. Our boys are not particularly academic, and that was a little bit of a struggle for us. Those who we've spoken to, either if they're particularly studious, or the girls seem to do better with the with remote learning and a bit more able to just sit down and do the study. They got through okay, but it was more time than we thought. To be honest, if we had our time over again, I would have just taken them out of school, said, you're going to drop back a year and we're just going to have some fun, because we did find that there were times when we're at sea when studying was difficult for them. And then we get to a port where we would want to go and do stuff, and they had to do study. And so the study kind of got in the way in a way. Stevie was young for his year, and when he got back, he struggled a little bit. So he came back a year anyway. So he was about at the old, rather than being at the younger edge, he was now at the older edge of his same age group.
Yep.
So had we done it again, I would have just said, look, we're just going to take the kids out of school, and that'd be that. And they'll survive and they'll do well.
You don't think the modern remote learning packages that people are now adopting at home would improve that at all?
Well, we were at the very beginning of that. It was interesting you say that, because the first half of the trip we had the old-fashioned paper-based stuff that they'd been using for many, many years, and the kids still remember the stuff that they did with that. Then it went to online learning, which was completely random, and it was make your own adventure, and that was just much more challenging for them. So they found the structure of the old-fashioned learning better. It might have improved a little bit now, but the trouble was the massive download that you expected to have. We didn't have at that time. We didn't have that kind of access, certainly in the Kimberleys. And the amount of, here are some optional things, it was very unclear what you had to do and what you didn't have to do. So it went from a nice structured thing which appealed to the boys to a very unstructured one which they struggled with. But that's more a commentary on the education system, I think, than sailing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I've noticed some of the others that are cruising Pacific and so on doing home learning. A lot of it is paper based. It's just too challenging, I think, to try and get downloads through sat phones and things.
The nice thing with the paper-based stuff is you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You get to the end of it, you stop, and then you can go up and do other stuff. Whereas the online one was never ending. It was always something else you could, might, or should do, and it was unclear.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess any other things that you would change or do differently next time around?
No, the one other thing which we haven't talked about, we had one other crew member on board with us at all times. We had an OPS stroke extra crew person helping with the kids' education. That worked really, really well. We had 6 different girls on board throughout the year, women and girls. So 2 of them we knew from home, 2 of them we found on Find a Crew, and 2 of them we met. They were just backpackers along the way, and they were fantastic. So it was a good experience for them, and it was good to have someone else to share the night duties. We do like a 2 on 4 off, 2 hours on, 4 hours off system, which works really well with 3 people. Sure. And from a medical perspective, it actually fits in with your natural REM, rapid eye movement sleep cycles, which usually last about 3.5 hours. So if you can get to sleep quickly, you can get a full REM cycle in a 4-hour shift of sleep. You get up for another 2 hours and go back and have another one. So you've had your full 8 hours over a 10-hour period.
Now, I didn't mention, I didn't ask you about your profession. You're a doctor. What about first aid and, medical supplies and preparation for the trip?
Yeah, so we had the usual medical, the first aid kits and stuff like that. You can get, as a captain of a ship going on a long distance journey, you can get special permission to get injectables like pethidine and things like that, stronger things. You have to have them in a sealed container and have some paperwork, but it's not hard to do, and it's not hard to be taught how to give injections for things like that. We had some antibiotics. We had, seasickness tablets and things. Mainly it was really for first aid, like fractures, cuts, scrapes, bandages. We had some sewing kit. Anybody who's done a safety of life at sea, you end up doing some how to sew people up. But it's mainly about antiseptics and infections and broken things and broken and cut things.
Did you have any major incidences on the way?
Not really. Just shortly before the trip, I got into the dinghy and forgot to collapse the anchor away and impaled my foot on the dinghy anchor, which went straight to the bottom of my foot. Being the good doctor that I am, I ignored all the appropriate medical advice, shoved a whole bunch of antiseptic in it, which the betadine, they say you shouldn't put betadine in words, but I did it anyway. Hurt like stink. It's always better to do it yourself. And then I stuck it up with some stereo strips, and you can't see it healed up fine. But we had a few little minor bits and pieces. We had some, a couple of hooks stuck in people from time to time. That's the usual sort of thing.
Yeah. No worries. I'm going to field a few more questions here for you, Craig. One here from Ray. I'm not sure if you recall, but how many engine hours do you think you racked up during the circumnavigation?
I actually have that. If you give me 2 seconds, ask another question while I'm searching for a slide and show something else so it doesn't look like I'm looking away. But I've got that on the slide here somewhere.
All right.
Where's it, engine hours?
Another question then, Craig. What age were you guys when you did the trip?
We were 21, as we still are.
As I expected. Thank you.
We're now, so I'm 60 now, so we're 52.
Yeah. Okay. And question around insurance. What did you do about insurance?
Pretty much nothing. We told them what we were doing, and that was fine because we weren't going offshore. It was just the regular Australian insurance. That was very easy.
Right, and that was through like a normal marine insurance company. Yep.
They were quite happy with that.
So you weren't paying, just on that point, you weren't paying a premium beyond what your normal domestic policy would be?
No, it was just the normal amount that we had to pay. We just had to tell them basically, because we weren't leaving the boat and we were on the boat, and we weren't travelling more than 300 miles offshore. It was fine. Can't find the number at the moment, but the answer is more than we thought. So we had, as part of the overall planning, we had some fuel calculations in there. We ended up using the engines for about 2.5 hours a day. Two reasons for that. One is you do end up motoring more than you think. Oh, little story. Coming down the West Australian coast, we were travelling with 2 other monohulls at the time. And they would get up and they would beat us because we were going upwind, and they would beat us to the rendezvous point. And I was feeling a bit bad by being on a catamaran, and they were teasing me about that. So one day I decided to get up very early, and I was heading off, and I was sailing for all my worth upwind and doing the best angle I could. And gradually they're catching me. And as they go past me, I was looking over and I see that they've got their engines on. And I said to them that night, "You had your engines on?" They said, "Yeah, we always have our engines on going upwind." And I went, "Oh, well, no wonder you're beating me." So we then turned on one of our 2 engines and beat them. So there you go.
There you go. Excellent. Just on that point,
the other one, just finishing on that, was power management. We had 2 120-watt solar panels, which is, these days you'd have a lot more. In fact, now we've got 1,200 watts of solar panel. So we've certainly beefed that up. And power consumption is a little bit less. But the fridges, on a long trip, you do use quite a lot of power keeping food cold. It's the fridges are probably the biggest single thing. So using the engines to generate power, and we had lead acid batteries in those times, you have to use the engines a lot more than you do for a lithium battery, which will take a much greater charge for a lot longer. So that was that. We had an engine-driven water maker, but that was basically free because we were using the engine enough for power that the water just cost us nothing. Yeah. Okay. And just back to the engines, I guess. You said you clocked up a few hours. What about fuel? Getting fuel up in some of these remote locations? How did you have plenty of, capacity, and were you stopping anywhere to pick up fuel? Yep. So I do have one exactly on that point. If I can, how am I going to do this? No, that's not worked. Just a second. I'm just going to just share my screen at the moment, if I can. Rightio. Can you see that there, Brett?
Yes. Yep.
So if I can make it full screen, well, tell me if that's still coming through. So there we go.
Yep. Got it.
Okay, so we were using 2 litres per engine per hour. We had 360 litres of standard tanks, and we had 2 jerry cans and an extra 75 litre tank in the foredeck. We refueled at McGowan's, quite expensive in those days. They were about $1 a litre normally. And it was $2.50 at McGowan's and $3 a litre at Dogleg Creek. So it's not cheap. Petrol's a little bit easier to find than diesel. So the good and the bad of petrol versus diesel. Petrol's a little bit easier to find, but off an outboard you get a lot less electricity. So there's a pros and cons there. And we used 517 litres of diesel throughout the Kimberley. So We would use less now because of the solar panels. We'd probably manage to get through the entire Kimberleys now on probably half that, I would think. But that was our fuel calculations just for the Kimberleys.
Excellent.
Yeah.
A couple of questions here from Charles. Was there a washing machine on the boat?
Yes, it's called the floor of the shower.
Right.
So when you're doing a lot of this stuff, I mean, you tend to, well, two things. One is anybody who knows any long distance sailors knows you can tell them from a distance. Secondly, basically all the washing was just sort of underwear, and you know, occasionally a shirt and that sort of thing. We'd get to ports and we'd wash there, but I mean, throughout the Kimberley, the weather was so good. It was a sarong and bathers most of the time. For the areas where we did wash, literally it was just shove it at the bottom of the shower when you're having a shower. Mm-hmm. We have thought about putting a washing machine on board, but we haven't yet done that.
Yeah. And I mean, we talked about it a little bit about experience before. I mean, did Kerry have a lot of sailing experience before this? Or was it primarily
she had sailed just on day sailing before we picked up the boat. Oops, sorry. What's that? Guys. So I got a bit. The children have woken up. Just give me 2 seconds. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. So what was the question? I lost some plot now.
Kerry's experience.
Oh yes, that's right. So as I said before, the most experience she got, she and I had both done some racing before. In fact, that's how I met her at the yacht club, through racing up in Darwin, where I met her. And she had done a little bit of overnight sailing there on a couple of races. That was the max she'd done. But then bringing the boats up from, both of our boats up from New South Wales to Queensland, and then just sailing up and down the coast with our boats was really her only experience until she went round.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way of getting into it. You guys do WAGs racing up there in Brisbane now. We have our Thursday twilight racing in Sydney, and it's a really great way for people to jump on the boat and get a little bit of you know, basic experience, and then maybe I still totally subscribe to the idea of having a boat in a charter fleet for a while and gaining some sea miles and experience for the family through that, but there's no substitute for getting time on the water, is there? So
really reinforce what you're saying there. I'm a strong believer that anybody who wants to go cruising should go and do some light racing. So the jib and main type racing that we do in WAGs, and I think you have the twilight racing. You really do need to know how to sail your boat well, where its limits are, and you want to push it to its limits where there's a rescue boat nearby, not when you're in the middle of the Great Australian Bight for the first time. Know what your boat can and can't do, and then you ratchet it back from that.
Know the boat's limits.
Yeah, and then you know how far. So you'd want to be no more than 75% of the boat's limits, which you can't do if you don't know where the limit is.
No, good point. Good point. A couple of questions around, I guess, where you went and the timing you went. Could you break this up into, say, 2 seasons and leave the boat somewhere for a cyclone season or something?
Yeah, absolutely. So now that you mention it, one of the questions you asked me before, would I do anything different? Yes, I probably would. If I had a bit more time, I would do it over, instead of over 6 months on the top and 6 at the bottom, I'd do 9 at the top and 9 at the bottom with a layover to catch up with the season. So I would maybe stop in Perth or something like that, and find a place to just to keep the boat. You can keep the boat in places along West Australia if you want to, and similarly on the east coast, you know, you'd come up in the summer, and then you might get to Brisbane or something and just wait a little bit so that the cyclone season's over before you started again in April. So you might have, you know, three months layover on each side.
Mm-hmm. And there are marinas. I mean, even in Darwin, there's places you could leave the boat safely during cyclone season, isn't there?
Yeah, there are, and that's certainly possible. But I was more thinking about like Geraldton or something like that. I mean, even if you just take your boat out and put it on a hard stand, which you can do in a lot of places.
Yeah.
You know, go do your maintenance, lock your boat down until it's very, you know, safe and secure.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was a question from Graham. So thanks, Graham. See if there's any other questions coming through here. Okay. I think that covers a good chunk of them. So unless you've got anything else to add there, Craig, one thing I guess someone did ask here before, I'm trying to find the question, but the choice of boat, you know, you did it on a Seawind 1160. I mean, was the boat big enough? You know, a lot of people want to go to much bigger boats. How did you find the boat at the end of the day?
Yeah, no, the boat was fine. We've still got the same boat. As you know, Brent, you keep nagging me to get a bigger one. And I say, why would I? I'm happy with the one I've got. It's not good for sales, I know, but I like the boat. I like the diesels. Other people are big on petrol. So my personal view is I stick with the diesel. You know, after the motors are now 13, 14 years old, you turn the key and it starts in half a turn every time without fail. It's just, there's more power you can get out of them from a generating point of view. We can run a engine-driven water maker off it. So I do like the diesels. So I'd make sure the boat was big enough to have that. It depends a bit on the layout of the boat. Some are more efficiently designed. The Seawinds, I think, are actually pretty good from an internal design perspective in terms of how much space you get for the 38, 39 foot. But around about that, I probably, people have gone around on the 10 metre Seawind. I think that's probably a little bit less comfortable. But anything from that size upward is fine. Yeah. I mean, if you want to give me a, you know, bigger boat, I'm more than happy to, you know, come back and say that I was lying if you'd like to sponsor me.
Well, I'll keep nagging you. You keep nagging me, and we'll just keep talking.
No, as I say, look, we're really happy with Scarlett. Since we went around Australia, we set it up the way we like it, and it's really been a terribly comfortable boat for all sorts of weather. Interesting story. When we came back, we would be here at home, and if there's a storm raging, I had an overwhelming urge to go down and sleep on the boat because it was my cocoon and it made me feel safe.
Yeah, excellent. Couple last questions here, bringing us up to the hour. Did you service the engines and water make yourself during the trip?
So the water maker doesn't need servicing; it just needs rinsing. We've had the water maker now for 10 years, and it's been rinsed. That's it. That's all it's ever had. Wow. The engines, no, I didn't. We got them done in Geraldton. We took the boat out of the water and got some. It was due for anti-foul anyway, so we had somebody there who knew what they were doing. But the last time I had it out, I did it myself. So I could have, but I didn't.
Excellent. And there's another question's come in here, actually around charting and charts up in the Kimberley and the northern part of Australia, which are notoriously inaccurate. What did you use? I guess were the charts good enough for you getting through those parts, or did you have any other information to guide you through this part of the world?
Yeah, it's called radar.
Right.
So two things with the charts. First of all, there's a whole bunch of stuff up there that says and still says unsurveyed. There are the local guidebooks, which I would always recommend. There's the NT Sailing Guide, for example. There's the West Australian Sailing Guide for the Kimberleys is just absolutely invaluable.
That's by the Royal Perth Yacht Club, I think, isn't it?
The one, yep. And neither of them show you things like where the pearl leases are, except in broad general terms. So I have, if I had a bit more time, I'd pull it up, but I won't bother. But I've got a little picture. You get good at using your radar and turning the gain up full and then gradually turn the gain down, because the corners of the pearl leases have radar reflectors on them.
Right.
So that was very handy, learning how to do that. We've got another photograph where the chart plotter said an island was in a particular place. We had an aerial overlay, which I'd also get for your charts, because the satellite doesn't lie about where the islands are. And so I've got a lovely photograph of the chart plotter saying an island's in a particular place, and both the radar and the aerial overlay say, no, it's not, it's over here. So use all the equipment at your disposal. I mean, it's part of the coal regs is you should know how to use all your equipment and use it. So your radar is an important piece of equipment. AIS is an important piece of equipment. Being able to be called up and to call up a ship by name using AIS, which tells you the name, is fantastic. We had major boats divert their course because they saw us on AIS and they said, oh, you stay where you're going, you're fine, mate, we'll just go 2 degrees to port and we'll miss you. These are big tankers that did that for us. So without AIS, they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't know who you were. You wouldn't be able to have a conversation. Yeah. So really, really important stuff.
Fantastic. Well, listen, we've just gone over the hour, so we'll wrap it up there, Craig. Thank you so very much for this. We're going to have a full replay available on our YouTube channel under the Sabbatical Summit Live playlist, and also on Facebook. So if anyone wants to dig into that, and we will send that out to those who registered for the webinar today. We're running these every Friday, so we'll have more topics coming up soon. So stay tuned for that as they come through. And if you want more information about the Seawind 1160 and the package that we've got for circumnavigating, please get in touch with us and we can send you out those details. And there are vessels available to inspect both in Sydney and in Brisbane and all around the world. So get in touch with us or through Seawind. We'll wrap it up there. But before we go, Craig, when this is all over and you're able to go sailing again, well, you're probably able to go sailing now anyway. So, there's no limitation for you. But what's next on the bucket list?
The next on the bucket list is to make sure that the current coronavirus doesn't completely bugger up my superannuation. And then we'd like to... couple of years from now, the boys will be a little bit more independently off our hands, and it's New Zealand. We'd like to do a figure 8 around New Zealand, and then up around Namibia, New Caledonia, all that sort of stuff. Excellent. All right. Well, we'll try and bring you a presentation from New Zealand soon. I think that's a good one to dive into. All right. Well, thanks, Craig. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you all next Friday. Craig, we'll see you next time I'm allowed into Brisbane. Thanks. Just if anybody has any other questions, I'm more than happy to, answer questions offline. Yeah, and we'll get some details up on our show notes on YouTube afterwards too. So, thanks for that, Craig. And thank you. Enjoy your weekend. Okay. Thank you very much.